The wind came down from the high ridge like a freight of nails, rattling the shutters and throwing handfuls of snow against panes. Clara Holt sat by the stove, mending the torn cuff of her work shirt when the pounding started. Not a polite knock. A fist, heavy and desperate, striking the door hard enough to rattle the latch. She set her needle aside and went to it, her boots creaking on the pine boards. She cracked the door only an inch, and in that instant the wind shouldered its way in, bringing with it a man who all but fell into her arms. He was tall, even bent over, wearing the star of a U.S. Marshal pinned crooked to his coat. Blood seeped down the front of it, dark against the tan wool. His breath came in wet gasps. He looked at her, eyes wide, and his voice rasped like a dry saw-through pine. "Don't let them have it." He fumbled in his coat, pulled something small and cold into her hand. The weight startled her. It was heavier than it looked. She glanced down and saw the badge, its surface dulled by age, but marked on the back with a strange engraving she didn't recognize. When she looked up again, his eyes had gone glassy. His head lolled forward, and his weight pulled her down to her knees. The stove's fire popped. Outside, the wind howled over the roof. Clara's breath came fast. She pressed 2 fingers to his throat, but found no pulse. The Marshal was dead. She stayed there a moment, her knees on the cold boards, the badge clenched in her palm, until the cold began to creep up her arms. Then she rose, slid the badge into her apron pocket, and dragged his body to the far wall, covering him with the quilt from her bed. The night pressed in harder after that. She locked the door and stood along while listening to the wind, the tick of the stove, the sound of her own pulse in her ears. She'd seen death before. Plenty of it after the mine took her husband and 3 others. But this was different. This man had crossed miles of winter ground to reach her door and die on her floor. By the time she stirred herself to think about riding into town for the sheriff, the snow had thickened into a curtain. The moon was gone. She decided she'd wait until morning. That was before she heard the horses. At first she thought the wind had fooled her, but then came the slow, deliberate crunch of hooves on snow. She crossed to the window, lifted the corner of the curtain, and counted 4 shapes moving up the ridge trail toward her cabin. Each carried a lantern swinging in the dark. The snow caught the light, glowing around them. Her fingers found the badge in her pocket without meaning to. She thought of tossing it into the fire, but she didn't. Instead, she crossed the room to the hearth, pulled aside the braided rug, and pried up the loose board her husband had set years ago for hiding coin from taxmen. She slipped the badge inside and set the board back into place. The rider stopped outside. Boots crunched on the path. A fist rapped against the door, not as frantic as the Marshal's, but with the easy confidence of men who expected to be obeyed. She opened it a hand's width. 4 men stood in the snow, their hats white with frost. One wore a long black coat with a fur collar. Another had a scar that cut through his beard. They smelled faintly of whiskey, even through the cold. "We're looking for a man," the one in the coat said. "Tall, coat like yours, badge on his chest. Came this way." She shook her head. "Ain't seen him." The scarred man leaned sideways, peering past her into the room. "You alone out here?" "Yes." His eyes dropped to the floor behind her, and Clara's heart stopped. A smear of blood darkened the boards where she dragged the Marshal's body. The man's gaze lingered a moment, then he looked back at the one in the coat. They exchanged a glance she didn't like. "Snow's thickening," the leader said at last. "Best keep your doors locked, ma'am. Dangerous folks about." They turned back to their horses, but as the last man swung into his saddle, he glanced over his shoulder and said, almost too softly to hear, "If you see him, tell him the next bullet's for him, and anyone helping him." They rode off, their lanterns fading into the trees. Clara closed the door and bolted it. The badge seemed to burn through the floorboards. She went to the quilt and looked down at the Marshal. His face was calm now, as if the cold had smoothed away the pain. She thought of the engraving on the badge, those strange markings, and wondered what they meant. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time she drifted, she'd startle at the groan of the timbers or the whisper of wind under the eaves. She thought of her husband's voice, the way he used to say the land kept you if you kept it, and wondered if the same was true of secrets. Just before dawn, she sat up in bed. Something was different. It took her a moment to hear it under the wind, the faint creak of a saddle. She pulled on her boots, took her rifle from its place above the door, and eased outside. The snow was falling soft now, whispering as it landed. A shape moved among the trees beyond the barn, a rider sitting still, watching the cabin. Clara stepped into the shadows and waited, her breath making ghosts in the air. The rider stayed a long while, then turned his horse and melted into the timber. She went back inside, her mind already turning toward town. But the thought of riding alone over that empty stretch with 4 men or more watching made her gut tighten. She'd wait until the light was strong. The day passed slow, her eyes flicking to the window at every sound. By late afternoon, the wind rose again, dragging a gray sky behind it. She was cutting bread when she smelled it, smoke, but not the pine wood she burned. This was sharper, hungrier. She ran to the door. The barn was glowing orange inside, fire eating through the roof. She snatched a bucket, then another, plunging them into the snow by the well. She ran toward the barn, her skirt snagging on the drifts, flinging water at the flames that only hissed and spat in reply. Inside, her mule was screaming. She dropped the buckets and wrenched the door open, heat hitting her like a slap. The rope halter was knotted tight, her fingers clumsy with the heat and panic. She got it loose and shoved the mule toward the door. The roof groaned overhead. They staggered into the snow, just as the rafters gave way in a rush of sparks. Clara stumbled to her knees, coughing, the mule shying away from the fire. And then she heard it, a crack, sharp and close. A bullet kicked snow up by her boot. She threw herself down, heart hammering. Somewhere beyond the light of the fire, a man's silhouette moved, then vanished into the trees. The snow hissed as the barn collapsed in on itself, sending a column of sparks up into the gray sky. Clara lay there a long moment, listening to the wind, the mule's frightened snort, and her own breath rasping in the cold. It wasn't just about the Marshal dying on her floor. It wasn't even about who'd fired that shot. It was about the badge, and whatever it meant, it was enough to burn her out and leave her dead in the snow. She rose slowly, brushing the snow from her skirt. The fire roared behind her, heat on her back. She looked toward the black line of the trees and knew she wouldn't be sleeping in her bed again that night. Tomorrow, she'd ride for town. Tonight, she'd sit up with the rifle across her knees and the badge hidden under her floorboards, waiting for the next knock on her door. And something told her it wouldn't be long coming. The cold at first light was the sort that bit through cloth and into bone, but Clara did not linger. She saddled her mule with numb hands, tucking the badge into a hidden pocket inside her coat. The barn was gone, the mule jumpy from a night's terror, but she told herself the ride to town would be quick if she kept her head down and her pace steady. She did not look back at the smoldering wreckage. Snow lay deep and unbroken on the trail, save for the faint scars of hoof prints from the night before. She urged the mule into a trot, breath hanging white in the still air. The sound of her own passage was loud, the crunch of hooves, the jingle of tack. The mountains crouched close on either side, heavy with snow. She hadn't gone 2 miles before she knew she wasn't alone. The sound was subtle at first, carried on the wind, another set of hooves, keeping pace just beyond sight. Clara's pulse quickened. She didn't dare turn outright. Instead, she stole glances over her shoulder. Through the curtain of falling snow, she caught the brief flicker of movement among the pines. She leaned forward in the saddle, urging the mule faster. The path twisted between stands of fir, offering cover both ways. The sound behind her grew, then broke into a gallop. Clara cut left onto a narrow deer trail, branches lashing at her sleeves. Snow slid from boughs in heavy clumps. She could hear the pursuit now, at least 2 riders, maybe 3. She rode hard until the trail pitched downward toward the frozen ribbon of a creek. The ice looked solid, but she knew better than to trust it. She followed the bank until she saw the crooked shape of an old shack, roof sagging under the weight of snow. Smoke curled faintly from its chimney. She didn't stop to think, just swung down from the saddle and pushed inside. The first thing she saw was the barrel of a rifle leveled at her chest. The man holding it was lean and dark-eyed, hair tied back with a strip of leather. His coat was patched in a dozen places and a knife rode easy on his belt. "Step back," he said. His voice was calm, not angry, but there was steel under it. "I'm not here to rob you," Clara said, breath clouding between them. "I'm being followed." The man's gaze flicked past her to the open door. "By who?" "I don't know their names. 4 of them last night. Burned my barn." He hesitated, then lowered the rifle a fraction. "You alone?" "Yes." He stepped aside and shut the door. The warmth of the small fire in the hearth was immediate after the cold. Clara's eyes adjusted, taking in the space, a cot in the corner, a battered table, shelves lined with traps and jars. "You can stay until dark," he said. "Name's Elias Crow." "Clara Holt." He studied her for a beat longer, then nodded toward her coat. "You're carrying something?" She stiffened. "Why would you say that?" "Because men don't burn barns and chase women through snow without reason." He sat, laying the rifle across his knees. "You want to tell me what it is?" She hesitated, then reached into the hidden pocket and brought out the badge. His eyes narrowed as he took it, turning it over in his hands. "Marshal's badge," he said, "but not just any. That mark there means he was working for Washington. Federal." Clara frowned. So it means he had evidence. Evidence someone wanted buried." He looked up at her, expression unreadable. "Men who kill marshals won't blink at killing you. I guess that much." "You guessed right." He handed the badge back. "They'll keep coming until they have it." She slipped it back into her coat. "Then I need to get to town." "To the judge." Elias shook his head. "You think the judge isn't bought? If the marshal came to you instead of the law, he didn't trust them." Before she could answer, the sound of horses came again, close now, circling. Elias was already on his feet, moving to the window. "They found your trail." The first bullet came through the wall, splinters flying. Elias snapped his rifle to his shoulder and fired back. A shout followed, then the thud of a man falling. "Back door," Elias said. They slipped out into the snow, keeping low. Elias led her down a narrow gully choked with brush, then into the shallows of a creek. The water was bitter cold, cutting through her boots. But Elias kept moving. "Why the creek?" she asked through chattering teeth. "Masks the trail." They followed it for what felt like an hour before climbing up a steep bank. Clara's legs burned from the cold and the effort, but she forced herself on. The forest opened ahead, revealing a wide expanse of frozen river. "We cross here," Elias said. Clara stared at the ice. "It won't hold." "It'll hold if we move quick." He stepped onto it first, testing each stride. Clara followed, leading the mule. The ice groaned under their weight, cracking like a gunshot. Halfway across, her boot punched through, sending a jolt of cold so deep it stole her breath. She stumbled, and the mule shied, nearly toppling her into the water. Elias was there in 2 strides, hauling her upright. "Don't stop. Move." They reached the far bank just as the ice gave way where they'd been. Clara collapsed onto the snow, breath ragged. Her feet burned from the cold, and her fingers were stiff and white. Elias hauled her to her feet. "There's a cave not far. We'll warm up there." The cave was little more than a hollow in the rock, but it cut the wind. Elias built a fire quick and small, its light flickering on the stone walls. Clara sat close, hands outstretched, watching steam rise from her wet boots. "You knew the marshal?" she asked. "By name," Elias said. "Jacob Kane. He was after a man called Mercer. Former cavalry officer turned gun for hire. Works for whoever's paying the most, railroads, cattle barons, politicians. And you think Mercer sent the men after me?" "I don't think. I know." Clara stared into the fire. "Then why help me?" Elias shrugged. "Mercer's killed my share of friends. You've got something he wants, maybe something that can finish him. You think I can finish a man like that?" Elias's gaze met hers. "If you're smart and lucky and mean enough when it counts." They ate jerky in silence, the fire popping softly. Outside, the wind had died, replaced by the steady hush of falling snow. Clara felt the weight of the badge against her chest, heavier now with the knowledge of what it meant. "You could take it," she said quietly. "Right away. I'd never stop you." "I could," Elias said, "but you're the one he went to. Means you're part of this, whether you like it or not." The fire's light caught the lines in his face, the shadow of old scars. Clara thought of the men who'd burned her barn, the bullet that had missed her by inches, and felt a slow, unfamiliar heat in her chest. It wasn't fear exactly. Not anymore. They slept in turns, one watching the fire while the other rested. In the small hours, Clara woke to find Elias at the cave mouth, staring out into the snow. "What is it?" she whispered. "Tracks," he said. "They found us again." By dawn, they were moving, leaving the cave behind. The snow was deeper now, the sky heavy with more to come. Elias led them along the river's edge, then up a narrow draw between cliffs. "We'll make for town," he said, "from the north. Less chance they're watching that road." As they climbed, the wind picked up again, funneling between the cliffs. Clara pulled her coat tighter, eyes scanning the ridges above. A crow called somewhere far off. They crested a rise and saw the first smoke of the town curling up from chimneys in the distance. But between them and it was a narrow pass, and in that pass 3 riders sat waiting. Elias stopped, cursing under his breath. Mercer's men. They turned back, but the way behind was already blocked by 2 more riders. Clara's hand went to the rifle slung across her back. "They'll try to take us alive," Elias said. "Badge is worth more if they know where it came from. But if it comes to it," he glanced at her, "don't hesitate." The men in the pass began to advance, rifles low. Elias swung down from his horse, using a boulder for cover. Clara did the same, the cold seeping through her knees as she crouched. The first shot came from the riders behind, slamming into the rock by her head. She fired back, the recoil jarring her shoulder. One rider fell, his horse bolting into the snow. Elias's rifle cracked twice, dropping another. The rest scattered, wheeling their mounts, firing wild. Bullets hissed past, striking stone and snow. Clara kept low, firing when she could, her breath coming fast in the freezing air. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shooting stopped. The survivors rode off, vanishing into the white. Elias reloaded, his expression grim. "They'll be back, and next time they'll bring more." Clara's hands were trembling, but not entirely from the cold. She had hit one of them, she was sure of it. The knowledge sat heavy in her gut, but under it was something else, the realization that she wasn't as helpless as she'd thought. They moved quickly after that, skirting the pass and cutting across open ground toward the edge of town. The buildings rose from the snow, like dark teeth, smoke curling from their chimneys. Clara kept her head down as they rode in, eyes scanning for movement. Elias led her to the back of a narrow alley. "Judge Randall's office is 2 streets over. We go there, get him the badge, and hope he's clean. And if he's not..." Elias's mouth tightened. "Then we run." Clara touched the badge through her coat. The town felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that meant someone was waiting. She looked at Elias, and in his eyes saw the same thought she had. Once they stepped out of that alley, nothing would ever be the same again. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and nodded. "Let's finish this." The snow in the alley muffled their steps, but Clara's pulse sounded loud in her ears. Elias kept to the shadows, his hand near the pistol at his hip. Ahead, Judge Randall's office sat on the corner, its windows dark despite the early hour. The street beyond was quiet, too quiet for a town this size. They reached the porch, boots creaking on the boards. Elias pushed the door open without knocking, and the smell hit them first, iron and rot thick in the still air. Inside, the stove was cold, the shades drawn. Judge Randall lay slumped over his desk, the back of his head gone. Papers were scattered across the floor, and a half-drunk glass of whiskey sat beside his hand. Clara's breath caught. Elias stepped forward, scanning the room. "They were here before us." The sound of boots on what came from a hall. For men filled the doorway, rifles raised. Clara recognized the scarred man from the night at her cabin. His grin was wide and empty. "Afternoon," he said. "We'll be taking that badge now." Elias didn't answer. He moved in a blur, kicking the table toward them. The rifles cracked, splinters flying. Clara dropped behind the desk as Elias fired twice, the sharp reports deafening in the small room. One man fell, clutching his chest, and the others scattered for cover. "Back door," Elias barked. They bolted down the narrow hall, bullets chewing at the walls. The door at the end gave way, under Elias's shoulder, spilling them into the snow. They ran, weaving between buildings, the shouts of pursuit close behind. Clara's lungs burned, each breath a stab of cold air. They ducked into the livery, the smell of hay and horses thick. Elias shoved a startled stable boy aside and swung into the saddle of the nearest gelding. Clara mounted her mule, her hands clumsy on the reins. The gunmen burst in as they rode out the other side, shots cracking past their ears. Elias led them down a side street, through the open gate of a snow-covered field, and into the timber beyond town. They didn't stop until the noise of the town was gone, replaced by the creak of saddles and the wind through the pines. Clara's heart was still hammering when Elias reined in at the crest of a hill. From there, the valley lay below them, the road curling like a frozen snake. "They'll follow," he said. "We need a place to make a stand." Clara's thoughts went to her cabin. The barn was gone, but the walls were strong, and she knew every inch of the ground. "There's nowhere closer than my place," she said. Elias considered, then nodded. "Then we make them pay to take it." They rode hard, the light fading by the time they reached the ridge above the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney. Elias slowed, eyes narrowing. "They've been here." Clara's grip tightened on the reins. "Then we flushed them out." They approached from the rear, keeping low. No movement inside. Elias slipped to the door and eased it open. The fire in the hearth was low, casting long shadows. A half-empty bottle sat on the table beside a tin cup. Whoever had been here was gone. "They'll be back with more," Elias said. "We use what time we have." They worked quickly. Clara rigged tripwires from wire and pots strung near the porch and between the trees. Elias stacked spare firewood under the windows to brace a shooting position. She loaded her rifle and set extra rounds within reach, the motion steady despite the tremor in her fingers. As the last light faded, the snow began to fall again, soft at first, then thick. The world outside the windows grew pale and strange, muffled in the storm's hush. Clara sat by the front window, Elias at the back, both watching. It was nearly full dark when the first shadow moved among the trees. Then another. Lanterns flared, swinging in the wind. The shapes resolved into riders, more than a dozen, their breath pluming in the cold. Clara's heart was a drum in her chest. She took a slow breath, sighted along the barrel, and waited. The first man stepped into the yard, boot crunching on snow. The tripwires snapped, pots clanging, and he spun toward the sound. Clara fired. The rifle's crack split the night. The man fell, and the yard erupted in shouts. Gunfire tore into the cabin's walls, with splintering, glass shattering. Elias fired from the back, the smell of powder thick in the air. Clara reloaded, fired again. A man staggered near the porch, clutching his side. Another tried to rush the door. She shot him through the thigh, sending him crawling back into the dark. The fight became a rhythm: load, fire, duck, breathe. Snow swirled in the lantern light outside, each shadow a threat. Elias cursed from the back room, and Clara turned to see him slump against the wall, a dark stain spreading on his coat. "Stay down," she said, dropping beside him. "Not dead yet," he growled, pushing the rifle toward her. "Keep shooting." She took his place, the stock solid against her shoulder. The men outside regrouped, firing in short bursts, trying to draw her out. She stayed low, answering with sharp, measured shots. Minutes felt like hours. The snow deepened, muting the chaos. Shapes moved less boldly now, their shouts growing fewer. Clara's arms ached from the recoil, her ears rang, but she didn't stop. At last, as the first gray light of dawn crept through the storm, the yard fell silent. She risked a glance. Bodies lay scattered in the snow, the survivors already retreating into the trees. She lowered the rifle, chest heaving. The badge was still heavy in her pocket, warm now from her body heat. Elias groaned as she knelt beside him. "They're gone," she said. "For now," he muttered. She helped him to the table, tearing strips from a sheet to bind his wound. His face was pale, but his eyes were steady. "You still mean to take that badge somewhere?" "Yes." "Where?" She looked toward the mountains, the thought forming even as she spoke it. "Fort Laramie. The army'll take it. Make it count." Elias nodded once. "Then you'd better move before they come again." They left as soon as Elias could mount, the cabin shrinking behind them in the snow. Clara didn't look back. She could still feel the night's cold on her skin, still hear the gunfire in her ears. The trail to the fort would be long and hard, but she'd carry the badge every mile, and if Mercer or his men wanted it, they'd have to take it from her hands, warm or cold. The snow closed over their tracks, erasing the night's violence. Only the bodies left in the yard would tell the story, if anyone cared to listen, and out here, Clara knew, most folks didn't care. The frontier didn't measure right or wrong. It measured who was left standing when the smoke cleared. That morning, riding into the pale light, with Elias beside her and the badge hidden close, she decided she meant to be the one left standing. The wind off the high plains was a knife's edge, cutting through wool and hide as if they were paper. Clara hunched lower in the saddle, her fingers stiff around the reins. Elias rode beside her, pale and tight-jawed, his right arm bound close to his side. The gelding beneath him moved steady, but Clara could see the strain in the set of his mouth. He was holding himself together by will alone. They had been riding since first light, keeping west along the frozen river where the snow lay thinner. The sun hung low, a weak copper disk behind shifting clouds. Clara had learned in these parts that the cold could hide things, men, animals, death itself, until it was too late. She kept her eyes moving. "How's it holding?" she asked, nodding to the bandage beneath Elias's coat. "Like a hornet's sting," he said, though the rasp in his voice told the truth. "You need rest. And you need more cartridges. Both will have to wait." The riverbank bent north, and with it came the first sign of trouble. 3 black specks cresting the far ridge, growing larger against the pale snow. Riders. She didn't have to guess who. Mercer's men hadn't given up. "They're still hunting," Elias said, his voice low, "and they've got the faster horses." Clara's pulse quickened. "Then we make 'em work for every yard." They urged their mounts into a trot, following the river until a split in the bank opened into a narrow cut. Cottonwoods leaned over the frozen water, their bare limbs creaking in the wind. Clara led them in, letting the trees swallow them from sight. The sound of hooves on the ridge behind grew louder, then dulled as the snow and timber swallowed it. They moved in silence for another mile before Clara spotted the dark mouth of an abandoned trapper's shack. Half buried in drift, it leaned like an old drunk against the hillside. She dismounted and shoved the door open. Inside, it was dim and smelled of damp wood, but it would hide them long enough to think. Elias tied off the horses in the trees, then followed her in. He leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "We can't keep riding in a straight line. They'll run us down before nightfall." Clara knelt, pulling her rifle free. "Then we change the line." They waited there, the minutes dragging slow. Clara kept to the window slit, watching the bend in the cut. The first rider came into view just as the light began to fade, tall in the saddle, rifle across his lap. 2 more followed, fanning out, scanning the timber. She steadied her breath, finger tightening on the trigger. A single shot cracked the stillness. The lead rider tumbled from his horse, the sound of his body hitting snow muffled and final. The others shouted, spurring their mounts for cover. Elias took the back window, firing twice. One man's hat flew, the other's horse reared. Clara worked the lever smooth, the recoil a jolt through her stiff arms. They didn't stay to finish it. Elias was already at the door. "Mount up. They'll circle." They rode hard through the timber, breaking out onto the open rise where the land rolled away toward the mountains. Behind them, The cut was filling with dark shapes, the shouts of pursuit chasing them into the cold air. Clara felt the ground change beneath her mule's hooves, the river ice. They were crossing at a shallow bend, the sound of cracking under the weight sharp in her ears. The far bank rose steep, and Elias's gelding slipped once before clawing up. Clara followed, glancing back only once. The riders were still 100 yards off, hesitant to risk the crossing. They didn't stop until the mountains rose close, black against the dimming sky. Clara's breath came in white bursts, her legs aching from the saddle. Ahead, Elias pointed to a notch in the ridge where the snow thinned. "Passage through," he said, "but they'll be on us before we're clear." The sound of pursuit had returned. Hooves striking hardpack closer now. Clara's stomach tightened. There was no more running left in the day. They reached the mouth of the pass just as the first riders broke from the trees behind. Clara wheeled her mule sideways, rifle already at her shoulder. The narrow ground meant they'd come 2 at a time, maybe 3. "Hold them here," Elias said, swinging down and bracing himself behind a rock outcrop. The first man charged, gun high. Clara shot him clean out of the saddle. The second hesitated, tried to veer, and Elias dropped him before he could turn. Snow sprayed as horses skidded, men shouting orders that the wind carried off. They came again, harder. 3 riders, guns blazing. Bullets whined off rock, chipped the ridge behind Clara's head. She fired until the rifle clicked empty, then ducked to reload. Elias grunted, around catching the rock near his side and showering him with stone dust. Her hands worked fast, sliding cartridges home. She rose, sighted, and took the lead rider in the chest. He pitched backward, legs stiff, his horse veering wild. The others pulled back, leaving him sprawled in the snow. Silence fell, broken only by the wind. Elias's eyes stayed on the tree-lean. "Not over. They'll wait for dark." Clara nodded, her jaw tight. "Then so will we." They crouched there in the narrow pass as the sun bled out of the sky, the cold sinking deep into bone. Clara's thoughts wandered to the badge tucked inside her coat, small, heavy, worth all this blood to someone. She didn't know who had sent Mercer, but she knew they'd send more if she failed to reach the fort. Night came, and with it, movement. A shadow slipped along the ridge to their left, then another to the right. Clara caught the gleam of metal in the starlight. "They're flanking," she hissed. Elias nodded once, shifting his weight. "On my shot." The crack of his pistol echoed off the stone. Clara swung left, her rifle barking, the shadow tumbling down the slope in a spray of snow. To the right, another man scrambled for cover, but Elias cut him down before he made it. A shout went up from the tree-lean. More riders surged forward, desperate now. Clara and Elias fired until the barrels steamed in the cold, each shot finding its mark or forcing the enemy back. Horses screamed. Men cursed, snow churned to bloody slush beneath the hooves. Then silence again. The ridge was empty. The only sound was the wind and the faint creak of leather as Elias lowered his gun. "They're done," he said, though his voice held no relief. Clara glanced at him. His face was pale, lips drawn tight against the pain. She knew they couldn't hold another fight. "We move. Now." They rode through the pass without looking back, the trail winding down toward the flat where the fort's beacon light glimmered faint and far. The air grew sharper, the wind stronger, but the sight of that light pulled Clara forward. Hours later, the gates of Fort Laramie loomed out of the snow, lanterns burning bright along the walls. A sentry hailed them, rifle ready, until Clara raised her empty hands. Inside, warmth and the smell of wood smoke wrapped around her. She slid from the saddle, legs nearly giving. Elias was helped down by 2 soldiers, his weight sagging between them. The fort's captain met her in the yard, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "You've come far in a storm, ma'am, and you've brought trouble, I reckon." Clara reached into her coat and drew out the badge, its metal dull in the lamplight. This is what they were killing for. The captain took it, turning it over in his hand. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "You've done right bringing it here." Elias caught her gaze from where he sat, blood seeping through the fresh bandage the medic had tied. "Told you you'd make it," he murmured. Clara looked past him, toward the gates where snow still swirled in the dark. She knew Mercer wouldn't stop, not for winter, not for the dead he'd left behind. But for tonight, the badge was safe. And tomorrow, she'd be ready again.